Artifacts. It's Jo with Jo to the World Creations, and today we're going to be making my adorable baby blanket. What you'll need to create this blanket is any size 3 yarn, which is light. I'm using Burnett Baby Sport, but you can use any brand as long as it's size 3 light yarn. You'll need approximately 1,500 meters or 1,640 yards. You'll also need a size H hook, which is 5 millimeters. Scissors, yarn needle, and optional is a measuring tape. The blanket is 30 by 40 inches, and it's made from the chain row up, meaning that the chain row is what determines the width of the blanket, and the number of rows determines the height. To make the width of the blanket bigger or smaller, adjust the number of starting chains in multiples of 2, meaning that your number of starting chains will be an even number. To make the height of the blanket bigger or smaller, make fewer or more rows. The pattern is available for free on my website, or you can purchase the print-ready, ad-free PDF. I'll leave links to both the free pattern and the PDF in the description below. This blanket goes perfectly with my Baby Booties pattern, and I'll leave a link to that pattern in the description below. Let's get started. To start, we're going to make a slip knot. So I take my yarn and I make it into a loop, and then I pull my yarn through the loop and pull tight, put my hook into my loop and pull tight. And now we're going to start our starting chains. So the pattern calls for 130 chains, but you can make it any chains you'd like in multiples of 2 or an even number. So we're just going to chain, and I recommend trying to make your chains not too tight, and you'll see why in the next row. I'm going to show you where you're going to single crochet. Some people prefer to go up a hook size for their starting chains only. Totally optional. I use an H hook for everything, but you're welcome to go up a hook size if you're finding your chains are really tight, but I just try to keep them quite loose. So go ahead and pause and come back when you've done your number of starting chains. You can do 130 to follow the pattern exactly, or whatever size you'd like in multiples of 2 or an even number. With your starting chains now completed, and for this video I'm just making a small sample, we are going to be single crocheting into the back ridge loop of each of the chains. The back ridge loop is not this top loop, it's not the bottom loop, but if you twist the chain, you can see that there's these bumps all along the back here, and that's where we're going to single crochet into. So starting in the second chain from hook, that's the first chain, this is the second, slightly twist the chain and insert your hook into the little bump, the back, and single crochet. And then the second bump, insert your hook into this back ridge loop and single crochet. And we're going to insert our hook into each of these back ridge loops and single crochet all the way down your chain row. So you can go ahead and put me on pause and come back when you've made single crochet stitches all the way down that foundation row, or the chain row, as some people call it. Now that you've finished single crocheting into the back ridge loop of every chain across the row, if you follow the pattern exactly, you should have 129 stitches, or no matter what number of starting chains you made, you should have one less. So you can count your stitches, make sure that you have either 129 stitches or one less than the number of starting chains that you started with. And you're going to chain one and turn. What we're going to do is in this very first stitch, the stitch that's attached to the chain one that we just did, we are going to single crochet and double crochet into the same stitch. Then we're going to skip the next stitch and single crochet and double crochet into the following stitch. So in this very first stitch, the one attached to the chain one, we're going to insert our hook and single crochet. In the very same stitch, we are going to double crochet. Okay, we're going to skip the next stitch, and in the following stitch, single crochet and double crochet into that same stitch. Single crochet, double crochet. And we're going to keep doing this all across, where we skip the next stitch, single crochet, double crochet into the same stitch, skip the next stitch, single crochet, double crochet into the next stitch. So I just did 2 stitches into the same stitch, single and a double. So I skip the next stitch in the next one, single crochet, double crochet. Skip the next stitch in the following stitch, single crochet, double crochet. And we are going to do that all the way across the row. So skipping the next stitch, single crochet, double crochet, skip, single crochet, double crochet, skip, all the way across until there are 2 stitches left. So go ahead and put me on pause and come back when there are 2 stitches left. As I'm nearing the end of the row, there are 2 stitches left. There's the stitch we just completed, the single crochet, double crochet, and then there's 1 more stitch before the end, and that is the stitch that we skip following the pattern. And then in the very last stitch, we are going to single crochet only. Just make a single crochet into the last stitch. If your stitches aren't working out this way, please start the row again, because this is how every row ends. You're going to do your last single crochet, double crochet stitch into the same stitch, skip the next stitch, and in the very last stitch, single crochet. Now we're going to chain 1 and turn and work the pattern again. Into this very first stitch here, we are going to single crochet, double crochet, then skip the next stitch, and then single crochet, double crochet into the following stitch. So in this very first stitch, the stitch attached to the chain, which is the top of the last single crochet stitch that we made, we're going to do our single crochet, double crochet in the same stitch. We're going to skip the next stitch, which is the top of the last double crochet we just did. So skip that. And then we're going to work into the next single crochet we did from the previous row. So it's the smaller stitch that we're going to work into, and we're going to single crochet and double crochet into that stitch. So single crochet, double crochet into that stitch. Skip the next stitch, and into the following stitch we're going to single crochet, double crochet. So it's easy to see where you need to work, because you're always going to skip the double crochet stitches, which is often much larger than the smaller. So you're always going to skip the larger double crochet stitch from the previous row and work into the smaller single crochet stitch. So in the next one, skip the double crochet stitch from the previous row and into the following stitch, single crochet and double crochet into the same stitch. And you're going to do this all the way across the row. So skip the double crochet stitch and into the next stitch, single crochet, double crochet. Continue doing this all the way across. And when you have really 2 stitches left, pause, and we will do the end again together. So I've just completed the row and I have the 2 stitches left. So my last stitch, the single crochet, double crochet in the same stitch. And now I have the next stitch, which we're going to skip. And in the last stitch of the row, we are going to single crochet only. Chain 1 and turn. And we are going to be repeating row 3 for the rest of the pattern. So the whole pattern is truly into the very first stitch, we single crochet, we double crochet, we skip the next stitch, and into the following stitch, single crochet, double crochet, skip, single crochet, double crochet, skip, all the way across until you get to the last row, or excuse me, last really 2 stitches. So in the second last stitch is where you skip the stitch and then single crochet into the very final stitch of the row. Each row has the exact same number of stitches. So if you're following the pattern exactly, the number of stitches is 129, or however many starting chains you did minus 1. So the number of stitches across every row will be exactly the same. So keep following this pattern until your rows measure approximately 26.5 inches or 67 centimeters, which is approximately 88 rows in total, or your desired height. After you've completed all those rows, don't fasten off. Come back to the video and we'll start the border. I'll put in the description exactly where we're going to start the border, so you can just jump right to that, and we'll complete the blanket together. So you've just finished your blanket body, and you can end on any number of rows. So whether that's 88 rows or 89 rows, it can be an even or odd number of rows, it doesn't matter. But you will want to make sure that after your final row, you've chained 1 and turned. So I'll just do that now. What we'll be doing next is single crocheting across every stitch along the top and then pausing right before we get to the final stitch across the row. So in the first stitch here, single crochet, and in the next stitch, single crochet, and we're going to single crochet in each stitch across the row until we get to the last stitch, which is the corner stitch. So go ahead, put me on pause, come back when you're on the last stitch of the row or the corner stitch. So I've just single crocheted all the way across my row except for the corner stitch, which is this last stitch right here. Before we do anything though with that corner stitch, what we're going to do is we are going to count our single crochet stitches and ensure that we have an even number of stitches across the row. Don't count the chain 1 that we did when we chained 1 and turned as a stitch. Just count all the single crochet stitches that have been made across the row before the corner stitch. We want this number to be an even number. If it's an odd number, we are going to add a second single crochet stitch, and this is only if you have an odd number of stitches, into the same stitch that we made right before the corner stitch. So in the last single crochet stitch that you made, if you have an odd number, you're going to make a second single crochet stitch in the same stitch here. But if you have an even number already, you don't need to do that. We can proceed with the corner stitch. In the corner stitch, we are going to single crochet 3 times into the same stitch. 1, 2, 3. Now that we've single crocheted 3 times into the corner stitch, we are going to be creating single crochet stitches all the way down. I'm going to rotate it so it doesn't really look down anymore, but into the gaps created at the end of each row. So if I stretch this out a bit, you can see that there's a bit of a gap created in between the very end of the row and one of the first stitches, and we're going to single crochet into each of those gaps at the end of each row. Now, that you may see a gap right here, but that's a gap created from the single crochet stitches we made into the corner. So we're not going to work into that. We're going to work into the next gap, which is right below that, to create our first single crochet into the gap. Next, there's another gap right beside it. So let's single crochet into that. And we're just going to work our way all the way across by single crocheting into each of these gap spaces all the way down. We're going to do that until we get to the very last gap space, and then we're going to do what we did along the top and count our stitches. So feel free to put me on pause and come back when you are at this very last gap right here. Not the corner. Well, yes, the next stitch will be the corner. So you crochet into this last gap stitch here. Okay. And now we're going to count our stitches, but we're not going to include the 3 single crochet stitches we did in the corner. So these are the 3 we did in the corner. We're not counting those. We're going to count everything from there, and we're going to see if we have an even number of stitches. We want there to be an even number of stitches. If it's an odd number, we're going to make an extra single crochet stitch. So I have 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 11. So since I have an odd number, I'm going to make an extra single crochet stitch into the exact same gap space that I made my last single crochet stitch in. So I'm just going to make another one. And now I have an even number of stitches, not including the 3 single crochet stitches. And now I can, into the corner stitch, which is the very last stitch in the row, I'm going to single crochet 3 times into that stitch. 1. And I will say, as I'm doing this, if you had an even number already, you do not need to make that extra stitch. That was only because I had an odd number that I made an extra stitch here, because we want even numbers. Now that we've made our 3 single crochet stitches into the corner, we're going to single crochet into each stitch across the bottom. So it may be a little tight because we worked into the back ridge loops, but we did that on purpose so that we don't have a large gap here. So it might be a little tight. Take your time and just single crochet into each of the stitches all the way across the bottom. So I've finished single crocheting in each stitch across the bottom, and I have 1 stitch left. And once again, we're going to count the number of stitches that we've made, but except we're not going to count the 3 single crochet stitches that we did in the corner. So I'm not counting any of these and just counting all the stitches I've made along the bottom to ensure that it's an even number. If you have an even number, single crochet 3 times into the corner stitch. If you have an odd number of stitches, once again, just make an extra single crochet into the last stitch that you made with the last single crochet stitch. You can just make another one right there. Then we're going to single crochet 3 times into the corner stitch. And one thing I want to mention is that you'll see on my sample here, this is where I first started the blanket, is on this corner. But if you started the blanket on that corner, that is absolutely fine. Don't worry about it. You can be working in either corners for this. Now we're going to be just rotating and single crocheting into the gaps created at the end of each row. So not into the space that we just made our corner, but into the next one. So mine is right here. And single crochet into the gaps. Do this all the way up until you get to the final gap. So you'll have one stitch left. And once again, count all your stitches, but not including the 3 single crochet stitches we made into the corner, and ensure that you have an even number of stitches. I do not have an even number of stitches, so I'm going to make an extra single crochet stitch so that I do have an even number. So in the very last place that I've made my single crochet stitch, I'm going to make an extra one here so that I have an even number of stitches. And in the final space, I'm going to single crochet 3 times into that corner space. Now to join, I am going to slip stitch into the first single crochet stitch that we made. So with my 3 single crochet corner stitches completed, I'm going to slip stitch into the first single crochet stitch made. With our foundation row of our border now complete, we're going to start the ribbing of the border. And to do that, we're going to chain 9, and that creates a ribbed border that's about 1.75 inches away from the blanket. If you want to make it a bit shorter, you're welcome to do so. I'm going to be referencing chaining 9 and following the directions for that throughout these instructions, but if you want to make it shorter, you can adjust the number of starting chains. So instead of 9, make it a smaller number. So now that we've slip stitched to the first single crochet stitch that we made, we are going to chain 9. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. In the second chain from hook, we are going to single crochet into the back ridge loop, which is the bump along the back. So second chain from hook, 1, 2, twist to the back, insert your hook into the bump, and single crochet. And we are going to single crochet into each of the back ridge loops down the chain. So we will have 8 single crochet stitches completed. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. With our 8 single crochet stitches now completed, we are going to slip stitch into the first stitch of the blanket body, the stitch that's attached to the ribbing and to the chain here. So this first stitch is what is attached to the ribbing, and I know it's a bit loose here, and that's okay, don't worry, it will all come together. We're going to slip stitch right into this first stitch, and it's going to really lock everything in place, just like that. We're not going to turn. What we're going to do is we're going to make another slip stitch into the following stitch. So we have 2 slip stitches made. Now we're going to chain 1 and we're going to turn. Now we are going to skip the chain 1 that we just made, this chain right here. We're going to skip the 2 slip stitches that we made. So we're not going to work into anything here. We're going to work into the single crochet stitches that we made, 8 of those. So skip the chain, skip the 2 slip stitches, and in the back loop, the loop that is furthest away from us, we're going to single crochet into the back loop of every stitch up. So once again, skip the chain, skip the 2 slip stitches, and working into the first single crochet, insert your hook into the back loop. See the back loop only. That's the front loop, that's the back loop. So I'm inserting my hook into the back loop only, and I'm single crocheting. Into the next stitch, same thing, insert a hook into the back loop only, and single crochet. And we're going to do this all the way up. So a total of 8 times. Always working into the back loop only, all the way up. So when we get to the top, let's count our stitches and make sure that we have 8 single crochet stitches completed. 2, 4, 6, 8. Perfect. Now we are going to chain 1 and turn. And we're going to rib down. We're going to skip the chain 1 and again work in the back loop only, which is the loop furthest away from you, all the way down across all 8 stitches. So skip the chain 1 into the back loop only, single crochet, into the next back loop only, single crochet, and work all the way down. Now, the very last stitch can sometimes be a little tricky to see. So I recommend that you always count your stitches, especially on the way down, to ensure that you always have 8 single crochet stitches that were made in the back loop. 2, 4, 6, 8. Perfect. Next, we are going to be slip stitching into the blanket body to connect the ribbing to the blanket. But I want to make a very important note that we are never ever, from this point forward, going to slip stitch into the stitch that's already connected to the ribbing. So if you can see here that this stitch is connected to the ribbing, skip that stitch and always slip stitch into the next stitch. So we're going to do that now. Don't ever, ever, ever work into this stitch here, but always work into the next stitch, the stitch that has nothing connected to it. So I'm going to slip stitch here. So where we just made that slip stitch is mandatory throughout the pattern. You need to slip stitch into that next stitch. But what is optional is how many slip stitches you make. So I'm always going to slip stitch twice. So I made that first slip stitch and I'm going to make a second slip stitch into the following stitch as well. So I have 2 slip stitches made. But you may find that by doing 2 slip stitches, it makes the border too tight. If you crochet tightly, you may find that you want to do either just 1 slip stitch. So you just made that one that we did to connect the ribbing to the blanket body, and then work the ribbing up and down again and only slip stitch once all the way across. That can make the border nice and loose and wavy. Other people have found that they like to alternate, so that for the first one they may do 2 slip stitches like I do. I do this all the way across, 2 slip stitches, but on the following one they would only make 1 slip stitch. So it's completely up to you, and you can experiment to see what's going to work best for you. Just know that what is absolutely mandatory is where you do that first slip stitch, and that it needs to be the one not attached to the ribbing. It needs to be in the following stitch. And then you can decide whether you want to make a second slip stitch like me, or if you're finding that's becoming too tight, start again and make 1 slip stitch, or alternate between 2 and 1. When you get to the corner, the instructions are going to be the same, and I'll be spending a lot of time on how to do the corner. The instructions will be the same whether you do 2 slip stitches, 1 slip stitch, or alternate between 2 and 1. The instructions are the same. So I've just made 2 slip stitches. As I said, you can make 1 or alternate, see what you like best. But after your slip stitch, whether it's 1 or 2, when you're ready to do the ribbing, what you're going to do is you're going to chain and turn. So you do that whether you've made 2 or 1. And then you're going to skip the chain. If you've made 1 slip stitch, skip that 1. Or if you've made 2 like me, you're going to skip both slip stitches and single crochet into the back loop only all the way up. And you're going to do that 8 times all the way up. Once you have 8 single crochet stitches made into the back loops, you're going to chain 1 and turn, and then single crochet in the back loop only all the way down. Skip the chain 1, single crochet into the back loop only all the way down. And remember, that last stitch is often hard to see, so make sure to count your stitches so it gets a little small and a little tight there. And I'm going to count 2, 4, 6, 8 to make sure that I have the 8. So we're now going to skip the stitch that's attached or connected to the ribbing here. We don't slip stitch into this stitch, but into the next stitch. That's mandatory, so you're always going to do this. And then what is optional is making this second slip stitch. I choose to do that, but again, completely optional. So I'm going to make a second slip stitch here. And that is truly the pattern. So from here all the way across until you get to the corner, what you're going to be doing is chaining 1, turning, skip over the chain and any slip stitches you've made, work in the back loop only of all the single crochet stitches all the way up, all 8. Once you get to the top, chain 1 and turn, and then work in the back loop only of all the single crochet stitches that you've just made all the way down, and then slip stitch into the next stitch, and then alternate or slip stitch, or don't slip stitch into that second stitch. That's the optional part. So you're going to go up and down all the way across until you get to the corner, and we're going to spend a lot of time on the corner. So work your way across the border, ribbing up and down, and when you are finished, come back to the video and we'll pick up how to do the corner together. So I've just completed ribbing across the top of my blanket, and I want to point out where we're going to start the corner. So this corner stitch, okay, this very last stitch is the corner stitch. we're going to start working the corner pattern into the stitch next to it, so the second last stitch. Now, as I've mentioned, I always slip stitch twice, but you may be nearing the corner if you may only have one slip stitch made, or if you're like me, you're going to have 2 slip stitches made prior to that second last stitch. So I've just completed my ribbing up and down, and I'm about to slip stitch twice. So everyone will do this, the mandatory connecting slip stitch, and then I'm going to slip stitch another time. But I wanted to point out that if you are just slip stitching once, you can do it one more time as you're nearing the corner, but I'm going to be slip stitching twice to continue my ribbing. So I'm approaching the corner, and I have 2 slip stitches made, but if you did one more, that's okay. The important thing to note here is that we're going to start working the corner pattern in the second last stitch. So how to start the border corner instructions, and I should say that the border corner instructions are the same for corner 1, corner 2, and corner 3. So this is corner 1, this is corner 2, this is corner 3, and they all have the same instructions. Except for corner 4. Those instructions are slightly different, and we will do those separately. But for now, just know that the first 3 corners all have the same instructions. So to start working the corner pattern, we're going to chain 1 and rib up and down again. So skipping the chain, skipping the slip stitches, and then single crochet into the back loops of each single crochet stitch up. And I'm going to pause this and pick back up when I get to the top. And now I'm at the top, I'm going to chain 1 and turn, and then rib down again. Skip my chain, single crochet into the back loops, and I'm going to pause once I've done my single crochet into the back loops all the way down. Okay, so I've just ribbed up and ribbed down, and I am going to slip stitch into the second last stitch. Now, I normally make a second slip stitch, but for the corner, I'm not going to. Just make the 1 slip stitch into that second last stitch, and now repeat the ribbing up and down again. So chain 1, chain 1, and I'm going to rib up along the back loops, and then chain 1 and rib down again, and I'll meet you back once that's completed. Now that I've ribbed up and down, I am going to slip stitch into the corner stitch. And we're going to be slip stitching into this corner stitch a total of 3 times. So when I slip stitch into this corner stitch for the first time, that counts as the first slip stitch made. So slip stitch into the corner, and that counts as 1. Now I'm going to chain 1 and turn and do my ribbing again, up, chain 1, turn, go back down, and then slip stitch into the corner again. But I'm gonna do this and then pause when we're just before we're slip stitching into the corner again. I've just completed my ribbing up and down, and now I'm going to slip stitch into the same corner stitch again, and that's counting as my second slip stitch made. Now I'm going to chain 1 and turn and do the ribbing again, up, up, chain 1, turn, and go back down, and I'll meet you back when we're about to do the third slip stitch into the corner. I've just ribbed up and down again, and now I'm going to make my third slip stitch into the same corner stitch. Now we're going to complete the ribbing again. So we're going to chain 1 and turn. We're going to rib up, chain 1 and turn, go back down, and we're going to slip stitch into the next stitch. So I will complete the ribbing up and down and meet you back when it's time to slip stitch into the next stitch. Now that I've completed the ribbing up and down, I'm going to slip stitch one time only into the next stitch. So if you are like me and like to slip stitch twice, for this next stitch, you're only going to make one slip stitch. Now we're going to chain one and turn and complete the ribbing again, and I'll see you back when it's time to slip stitch into the next stitch. So now I've just ribbed up and down, and into the next stitch we are going to slip stitch. So everybody do this, slip stitch into the next stitch. And if you are doing what I do, which is slip stitch into 2 stitches, now is when we resume doing the 2 slip stitches. However, if you have been just slip stitching once, continue on. But if you are alternating or doing the 2 slip stitches like me, this is now when we resume the border ribbing across, where you make your 2 slip stitches all the way across the row. So now we're going to resume the pattern of just ribbing up and down, making 2 slip stitches or 1 or alternate all the way across until you get to the next corner. At the next corner, follow the exact same instructions that we just did for the last corner. And then you'll also follow the same instructions for corner 3. I'll rotate it here, but that's corner 3. And then you're going to follow the ribbing instructions where you go up and down all the way up to where you first started the border. And at that point, the instructions are almost the same, but pick back up again and we'll do the last corner together. So as you're approaching the last or 4th corner, you will have 3 stitches left. I've just completed 2 slip stitches nearing the last 3 stitches, but if you only have 1 slip stitch, that's absolutely okay. We are going to be repeating the exact same instructions that we did for the 3 previous corners, with the exception of the very last stitch. So the first step is to chain 1, rib up and down, and slip stitch into the next stitch just once. So I'll do that and pick back up when we're slip stitching into the next stitch. So I've just ribbed up and down, and I am going to slip stitch into the next stitch. And then I'm going to chain 1 and turn and complete the ribbing again. And then we're going to be slip stitching 3 times into the corner stitch. So I will go up and down and pause when we're at the corner stitch. Okay, I'm ready to now make my first slip stitch into the corner stitch. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to slip stitch into that corner stitch, and then I'm going to rib up and down again, make a second slip stitch into this corner stitch right here. Then I'm going to rib up and down again and make a 3rd slip stitch into that corner stitch. After I've done that, I'm going to resume filming and meet you back at this point. So I've just made my 3rd and final slip stitch into the corner stitch, and I have 1 stitch left. So since I've just done my last slip stitch into the corner, I'm now going to chain 1 and turn and complete the ribbing again, up and down, and then slip stitch into the final stitch. And I'll tell you what else I'm going to do after I do that. Then I'm going to do the ribbing 1 final time and make another slip stitch into this last stitch. So there's actually going to be 2 slip stitches made into the next stitch, but we can do that together. So I've just made my 3rd and final slip stitch. I chain 1 and turn, and I'm going to complete the ribbing, and I'll meet you back when we are about to slip stitch into the last stitch. So I've just completed my ribbing up and down, and I'm going to work my first of 2 slip stitches into the last stitch. When I say first of 2, I just mean that we're not doing 2 at once. We're now going to do one final ribbing. So I've made my first slip stitch. We're going to chain 1 and turn. We're going to rib up and down and make one last slip stitch into that same stitch. So go ahead and do that, and let's meet back again when we're at that last slip stitch. All right, last step here. I've completed my ribbing up and down, and I'm going to slip stitch into the same last stitch of the border. Ta-da! With my last slip stitch now completed, we are going to be assembling the beginning and the end of the border together. So what we're going to do is we're going to take our hook and our yarn and move it to the back so that the 2 pieces are in front here. And we're going to take the beginning and the end, and you can even put your hook down so you can have both hands for this if you want. And we're going to close them shut like it's a book. Okay, close them shut. And we are now going to work along the back of them like this. Assemble the 2 sides so that they're perfectly lined up. Okay? And we are going to be slip stitching these together. And how we're going to be doing that is, I'm going to take my hook out just for a sec to show you. We're going to be slip stitching the back loop of the stitch that's closest to us. So this loop right here, we're going to be slip stitching this to the front loop of the stitch that's furthest away from us. So this loop here. So these 2 loops are going to be slip stitched together. These 2 loops are going to be slip stitched together. These 2 loops and all the way up. But just make sure, I just want to make sure that my sides are exactly lined up. And I think there's a hidden one here, so just check to make sure that you've got all 8. That looks about right. There's 2, 4, 6, 8. Okay, so with your hook, you are going to insert your hook, and just make sure that you keep your yarn really tight for this. So if it got loose in the process of lining them up, just tighten it up. Insert your hook into the first single crochet stitch into the back loop only, and then insert it into the front loop only of the stitch furthest away from you. Okay, pull through your yarn, and the first one can be a little tricky. Okay, pull through your yarn and slip stitch. Make sure that it's nice and tight. And now let's do the next one. Insert your hook into the back loop only of the stitch that's closest to you and the front loop only of the stitch furthest away. Pull the yarn through both loops and the loop on your hook to slip stitch. Keep everything nice and tight. Now back loop, front loop, slip stitch, tight. Back loop, front loop, slip stitch, tight. Make sure my stitches are lined up here. Back loop, front loop, slip stitch, tight. Back loop, front loop, slip stitch, tight. And the last one, back loop, front loop, slip stitch, tight. And that completes the assembly. So all that's left to do is fasten off, cut your yarn, pull your yarn through, make it nice and tight, and use your yarn needle to then weave in all your loose ends. And now you have a brand new adorable baby blanket. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed making this blanket. If you liked it, please, I would love if you subscribe to my YouTube channel and give this video a thumbs up. I'm here if you have any questions, if there's anything I can do to help. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful day.